Welcome, everyone, to yet another live. I'm your host, Christopher Balkaran. Folks, thank you so much for joining me on today's live. I've got my whole setup. I'm still kind of messing around with my setup here, but I really hope you're enjoying my content, asking the tough questions that I think Canadians need more answers to. And one topic that so many of you have told me about time and time again that you want me to look into, that you're dying to get some answers on, are the number of Indian international students that are in Canada today, number of Indian temporary foreign workers in Canada today. And you're asking these questions not from a place of hate and xenophobia and racism, but from a place of genuine curiosity. And I think when we don't ask these questions, it can lead into xenophobia and racism, etc. So in today's live, I'm going to be talking specifically about answering that question: why are there so many Indian international students, South Asian international students that we have seen prop up in Canada, especially here in Ontario, over the past 10 years? It has been wild, the number of Indian international students, and Canadians naturally have questions. And again, these questions are not hate filled, they're just questions about why this one region more than others. And in my previous videos, I've attempted to explain the why a little bit more as to why India is at an advantage over other countries. But before I go into that, I just want to share with everyone some stats, just so that it doesn't matter where you are supporting or against, etc. I think it's important we start with some numbers because that's very important to contextualizing this. In 2010, there were 280,000 international students across our entire country. And by 2023, we had 1.04 million. In that short time span of 13 years, we 4xed the number of international students. And of them, in 2014, 2013, about 30,000 were from India. And by 2024, it was closer to 400,000. So over 10x in a span of, again, 13 years. And so this is something that has gotten a lot of Canadians wondering, again, what is going on? How did we get here? And we have to remember, too, that India represents about 40% of all international students that are coming to Canada. Now, I know some of you have asked, well, like, there's something going on. There's like this, like, perhaps even a plan in place to have more excuse me, some more Indians come to Canada. Maybe there's some deal that Modi and Trudeau and Carney are making, but I haven't been able to find enough about that. However, I will say that when it comes to Indian international students, they are at an advantage than other students from around the world for three main reasons. One, um, so I'm gonna not do this in order, but there's three main reasons I want to mention. One, for many international students, they're not necessarily looking to Canada as a pathway to citizenship. There could be cultural reasons for that. There could be other opportunities, for international students, say from China and the Far East. Maybe going to the United States is more appealing. Um, for or maybe Europe, or maybe coming back to the home country is more appealing. So go to Canada, get the education, but come back. For other international students, it's all about getting into the United States. Like that's the goal. And so if they come to Canada, they're here temporarily, but with the goal of getting down into the United States. So again, for different international students, it's different in terms of what they want. But for Indian international students from specific regions like Punjab and others, there's real pride by their community in coming to Canada. Uh, immigrants from Punjab, yeah, immigrants from Punjab have been coming to Canada since the early 1900s and perhaps even earlier. Um, And so there's a long history and there's well-established communities in Canada, for specifically the Punjab community, but others as well. So, it's viewed in some communities in India as a source of pride, as a source of development by coming to Canada and becoming a citizen. And for a long time, if you were an international student, there was no pathway to citizenship. And so the allure of Canada for Indians in particular increased, because now you could come to Canada for education and stay as a permanent resident potentially. So that's one. There's again different cultural affinities to Canada. The second is that Indian students in particular are at an advantage over other countries because they're taught English at a very young age. Um, they speak multiple languages, but in order to be qualified for a permanent residency in Canada, you have to speak either English or French. And so Indian international students do much better on tests for proficiency than other international students from other parts of the world where English is their second language. We can all debate whether or not their proficiency levels are there, but the reality is they are at an advantage over other students just based on English. And the third reason is that in order to come to Canada and to become a permanent resident or citizen, you do have to show that you have money in the bank. And for Indian international students, many of their parents not only send them tens of thousands of dollars to go and show the government, but there's greater stability in the Indian banking system than there are in many countries around the world. And so if you have 25, 30, 40,000 in a bank in India, chances are you can withdraw that money without much like difficulty. And so those three reasons alone make Indian international students much more um, they can immigrate to Canada, and they're at a natural advantage or an advantage over other students from other parts of the world. So I say all of that to contextualize the numbers. Once Canada created pathways to citizenship in the mid 2010s under the Trudeau government, we saw an explosion of international students from India because of the reasons I mentioned. English proficiency, money in the bank that the government can access, and that they have a deep affinity to coming to Canada. It's seen by some in India as a form of prestige. So now that we have that contextualization, and now we can kind of start understanding why there's 40% of all international students that Canada lets in are from India, then we can get into the numbers. And the numbers are pretty wild. And so before I begin, I just want to say that our college and university system has not been funded properly since the global economic recession. So, the global economic recession, if you cast your mind back to 2008, governments were really panicking about what to spend their money on. And interestingly enough, I went down a lot of different rabbit holes for this, but the United Kingdom actually said, or at least their plan was, to reduce their post-secondary spending because they considered that as like secondary spending, like not primary spending. And at the time, the governments were looking for cutbacks any way they can find it. So the UK cut back on post-secondary funding and started attracting more international students to the UK because they pay more in international tuition than domestic students. So universities across the UK would get massive revenue increases, and the UK government could retrench from spending so much on post secondary. I say this because Canada basically followed the same model. And I'm going to share with you, if my screen comes up, just some really important stats that we should really start looking at. Now, where did I had so many stats here. Here we go. So I'm going to share with you my screen and we're going to get into some of the numbers because I think this is very important. So bear with me as I share my screen. Here we go. Now, this is a report, and let me just go all the way back up. For anyone who's really interested, I'll leave a link below from Higher Education Strategy Associates. They're a Toronto-based firm providing strategic insight and guidance on post-secondary institutions. So if you are really interested to check this out, again, link in the description below. So I wanted to talk about institutional income and expenditures. Public post-secondary education is a nearly $60 billion per year industry, making up approximately 2.3% of GDP. It's pretty wild. So you can see here that from 2000 to 2021, overall institutional income rose by 77% in real terms, from 35 billion to 62.4 billion. And note what I said about the global economic recession. Until the financial crisis of 2008-09, revenues were mostly from governments, students, and other self-generated income. This changed after the 2008 financial crisis. Income from governments stagnated while income from students steadily increased. So you can see here, and if I can zoom in, oops, and expand this course, PSE institutions, Canada in billions. You can see here, government is the dark blue. And again, in 2009, it kept going up to just over 20 billion. And then since, let's say, about 2012, it's stagnated, just hovering around 20 billion. It has not really gone up at all during this time. Of course, you can see students have been going up quite substantially today. And then other is also, going up, but maybe not as much as others. So you can see the point here is that government funding has stagnated. Um, Again, this is something that's really interesting, and this is where we're going to get into in a little bit more detail. Total fee income by source. So, fee income by source, you can see domestic students. Interestingly enough, folks, tuition across public post-secondary education has actually stagnated for domestic students. It has stagnated. Um, Income by source, international students have gone up, have gone up quite dramatically. And this obviously is in alignment with the number of international students. Remember, we went from 280,000 in 2010 to over 1 million by 2023. So, of course, we're going to see more money from international students for our post-secondary education system. But I also want to share with you a couple things that are really interesting. Because again, I think this is so important that Canadians understand. So let me share with you again from the same report. Real change in government and student fee university income Canada. So you can see here, real change in government has stagnated from 2008 to 2022. But student fees have just dramatically gone up. And that is a really interesting marker. I'm going to read to you what the report says. In real terms, income from public sources was rising sharply prior to the recession, global economic recession, roughly 6% per year after inflation, in line with the growth of income from student fees. After 2009-10, government revenue went into a long, gentle decline in real terms before recovering slightly after 2015-16, and then receiving a one-time lift during the COVID pandemic of 2020-2021. Meanwhile, revenue from student fees have grown at about 6% per year continuously throughout 2021 to 2022, resulting in a cumulative, try saying that 10 times fast, 101% increase in real fee revenue over 14 years. And then figure 3.6 shows total college income by source. Trends in the college sector appear somewhat similar. Um, the composition of income is somewhat different. Revenues have gone up. Okay. So you can see just on student fees alone, the impact has been quite dramatic. Now, I say all of this because at the same time, student domestic student tuition here in Canada has flatlined. Interestingly enough, tuition is not nearly as different for domestic students here in Canada than it is for than it was, even 10 years ago. It's been roughly the same, which is wild when you think about it because of that thing called inflation. And we know that especially during the pandemic years, there were spikes of inflation, and yet still, domestic tuition has not gone up. Now, I want you to cast your mind back to 2008, 2006, 2007. During this time, domestic student tuition was always a hot button topic. If you cast your mind back, if you're old like me, if you cast your mind back to 2006, '07, '08, you'll remember that during the Kathleen Wynne years and the Dalton McGuinty years, there were countless, tuition protests across campuses. I'll see if I can find some online. But basically, there were just endless tuition um, protests in Canada, 2006. Let's see. Here we go. And again, this is just me Googling this for us right in real time. So I'm going to share with you again. This is not news to anyone. It shouldn't be, at least. But this is from 2008. Students in 14 Ontario cities protest high tuition fees. Posted November 2008. And so it says here college and university students are considering more protests to get the provincial government to cut tuition fees. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. If you can't see it, let me know. And is disappointed. Da, da, da. Here we go. Melanson, Dalton McGuinty has betrayed us yet again. Students across Ontario are fed up with McGuinty simply paying lip service to accessibility. Today, we are demanding concrete action to drop fees. Melanson notes that when McGuinty went to law school, tuition was $700 a year compared to $20,000 now charged at the University of Toronto. Students also held similar rallies. Da, da, da. Protesters cited StatsCan data released last month that indicated students in Ontario pay an average of more than $5,643 per year for an undergraduate degree. And so if we think about that, just remember that number, 5,600 and whatever it was, 43. Jahan says that Ontario's fees are too high and are forcing students to take on part-time jobs to make ends meet. I think it's a little bit too much for someone that wants to study at the same time as well. This is for working. All you want to do is become a doctor and help other people, but we can't even do that because we don't have enough money. Jack Layton, the late great Jack Layton, says right now, the barriers of tuition fees and student debt are standing in the way of your dreams. So again, folks, this was after just a simple Google search, and I'm certain if you scroll down, you'll find a lot more. So, folks, remember that number of 5,643? That number 5,643, keep that number in your mind. That was 2008. And if we use the inflation calculator, we're doing this in real time, folks, because I'm curious what you think. Let me just show you all this because it's so important. Inflation calculator. So we're going to use the Bank of Canada's inflation calculator. And again, we're going to say that Tuition is 5,643 and the year is 2008. Um, that should be $8,146.62 today. $8,146.62 a day, a 44% increase over 17 years at an average annual rate of 2.18. Wow. It gets you thinking about like compound interest and all those things. So anyways, all that to say, if you spent 5,643 in 2008, it should be $8,146 today. So very interesting. But I want to share with you what the data shows about tuition across Canada right now for domestic students. Going back to my handy dandy report. Figure 4, institutional income by provincially controlled sources, domestic tuition. It was really high and it completely dropped off, as you can see. The erosion of fee, you can see right there. Where did my domestic tuition piece go? Where did it go? Um, we'll get to that in a second. There was my domestic student tuition piece, and now I can't find it. This is why, folks, it's so important to have these things like lined up. But long story short, if I can't find it, I'll just have to tell you. Oh, here it is. Is this one? No, it's not. Here we go. If you can believe it, in 2008, again, it was $5,000, right? 5,164. Remember, it should be 8,000, over 8,000. And if you look at it today, it's less than 8,000. It's less than 7,000 today, estimated. I know that's really hard to see. So let me see if I can expand this. It's not really showing what I needed to show, but I think you get the picture. But if you don't, let me just zoom in even more so you can see it. 2008-09, again, roughly at that mark there. 5,164 is the average. It kept climbing, and then it is now, as of 2023, just under 7,000. So you can see that this is not keeping pace with inflation. It's actually going down, which is quite interesting because nobody actually talks about that. But maybe maybe McGinty and Wynn and Ford have all realized that maybe we should reduce. But all that to say, domestic tuition in Canada is going down. It's not nearly what it should be or what it was back then. I share that with you because of this very interesting stat that I think more people need to be familiar with. I promised something to share with you, and this one is really, really interesting. So let me just share my screen again, going back to my handy dandy report from Higher Education Strategies. Institutional operating income by source, Ontario colleges 2023 to 2024. Check this out. Indian international students, 2 billion. Government of Ontario, just under 2 billion. Indian international students are funding our colleges more than the government of Ontario. Other international students are less than 1.5 billion. Canadian domestic students are just over a billion. Indian international students are double what Canadian students are funding our colleges. How wild is that? International students are expected to make up over half the student body in 23-24. Given that tuition for international students is something like 3 times what it is for domestic students, that means that something like 76% of all tuition fees in the sector come from international students. 76% of all tuition fees come from the international students. And as figure 6 shows, since a majority of these international students come from India, it turns out that Indian international students not only contribute twice the amount of money to the college system on aggregate that Canadian students do, they contribute slightly more than the government of Ontario. The answer is simply this: Ontario institutions faced with deep cuts in income have acted precisely the way the government has asked them, by acting entrepreneurially and securing new forms of revenue. This isn't a mistake. This is exactly what the Ontario government requires. So it's very important. I know the report says that Ontario is an outlier. Um, but if you look at the total income per FTE student by source and type of institution, you will see that Ontario universities disproportionately rely a lot more on student fees than the rest of Canada. It is pretty wild. And no province has underfunded post-secondary more. No province's institutions have found so many ways to raise money from private sources. On a per student basis, the province funds universities at 57% of the average of the other nine provinces. On the college side, it is a mere 44%. So I shared this with you to do a few things. One, to go back to the beginning of this live where I talked a lot about the number of international students from India, their unique competitive advantage compared to other international students from around the world, their ability to speak English, to have money in the bank account, deep ties with Canada already, source of prestige, a pathway to citizenship. And now we see that the majority are funding our college system at a higher level than our own government. I say again all of this because that is what helps explain why there are so many Indian international students. The pull factors are real. The push factors, which I didn't get into, are also real. The push factors in India: high youth underemployment, high youth unemployment. There's over 300 million Indians between the ages of 15 to 24, so they're going through a massive youth boom right now. And there's distrust and mistrust in their public institutions in India. The idea that they can't really trust their government, that they don't know if their government's going to do what it is that they said that they will do. So there's a lot of mistrust and distrust as a result. And that's how Canada got into this mess. A lot of push and pull factors. In the 2010s, we created pathways to citizenship for Indian international students, but international students as a whole. But Indian international students were at a unique advantage for the reasons that I've mentioned above. And with Ontario and the rest of the provinces retrenching from funding post secondary, international students, particularly from India, are on par with our own government's funding, if you can believe that. So I hope that this helped understand a little bit more why there's so many Indians. Um, I think that in subsequent lives, I'm going to talk more about, what we're seeing, like the fraud and other things like that, that is happening. And it's not to say that every international student from India is doing this, but there is a lot of fraud that the government has found in many letters of acceptance from India. So, in order to come here as an international student, you have to show a letter of acceptance from a designated learning institution. And just a preliminary assessment has seen a lot of fraud from um, Indian representatives representing students. Excuse me. So I think that's going to be my next live. Get into this in a little bit more detail. Again, I'll link below the research that I found for today. Again, if you're liking my content, folks, I have a shameless ask for all of you. Please like, share, subscribe as always, but please tell your friends, your family, those who are truly looking for more and more explanations on YouTube about all the things happening in Canada. I've noticed so many of you have reached out to me. You're asking me questions, but it's also so important that you just tell people about this channel because I'm constantly looking to improve and grow and share with you. And shameless plug as well, over the next maybe few weeks, I'm working really hard. You'll notice that, like, I used to post every day. I'm posting almost every other day now because I'm working really hard on my next digital product. And it's gonna be about everything I talked about today in even more detail. Like, why are there so many Indians in Canada right now, this massive upsurge? I decided, like, I need to turn this into a document that I can share and sell with you because there's so much good data there that I think you're really gonna, really like and dig into. So watch for that. I'm working hard on that. It should be ready by the new year. I'm hoping before. Every night I'm just kind of like hacking away at it. But all that to say, again, if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe. And folks, again, tell your friends, tell everyone you know about this channel, Christopher Balkaran. I'm trying my best to be everywhere out there. So like, share, subscribe, and I'll definitely catch you in the next one. Take care. Have a great night and a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.